So, the first film I'm going to show is the film that Martin thought was too slow, and also, uncannily, it does feature, not by choice exactly, some sound effects from the Mr. Bean movie. Because it was my first year film at the RCA, and the sound lecturer was the sound designer on the Mr. Bean movie, I think, and he supplied me with some of his sound library. So that's that. And so I had made some animations before this that were more, I suppose, like what Martin was saying, kind of existential angst type films, but they were all collage animations and made on a fine art degree where there was no real animation teaching, so I didn't have any idea how to make an animation really. So this film that I'm going to show first was the first time I'd done any drawn animation, first time I'd used any kind of animation techniques or anything like that, and it's a bit of an anomaly in my work in that it's kind of it's not really like character based, but it has characters in it, whereas most of the stuff is, as Martin said, a bit more abstract. So like all of my films that I'm going to show, it was an experiment. I didn't plan it in advance. I just started with a kind of vague idea based on some drawings that I had done to see what would happen and to learn how to make a particular type of drawn animation. So it kind of came together. It came together very easily, and I enjoyed making it. And I think probably more people have liked it because it's got a humour element. More people have liked it than a lot of my other stuff, but I sort of never made anything like it after. So yeah.
Okay. Is it Paul? Mike, sorry, do you mind hitting your lights?
So the way that I work is very much based on trying to tap into something unconscious, and it's kind of an extension of the way that I've drawn since I was quite young, and it's mainly based around what I enjoy doing, which is drawing and seeing what happens, and then things coming out that kind of surprise me and that I like, and trying to extend that into animation. So what I'm interested in, I mean, I like a lot of different types of animation, but what I'm particularly interested in, I guess, is what you might call experimental animation, in terms of it's an experiment, it's not planned in advance, and it might be a formal experiment or it might be a bit more of a personal work, but it's not made in a way that's like the kind of studio system. It's not planned meticulously, it's not made by normally more than one or two people. So I'm going to show some other work tonight as well by other people that I kind of feel relates or provides some context to what I do. And for a long time I didn't feel like there was really much that I identified within animation, and the vast majority of animation, even though I like a lot of it, I just didn't feel like I related to it. And I think because I came from a fine art degree, I was just doing it for different reasons really. I've never really thought of it as a commercial thing, and I've always struggled with the idea of it as a career as such, because it is what I want to do and what I prioritise doing. But if I get it caught up with making money and things like that, it doesn't really aid the work very much, because I kind of need to have the ability not to know what I'm doing. For something interesting to come out to make the best films that I can, because I'm not really the filmmaker that makes kind of, you know, a mainstream comedy or something. I guess I'm just not interested in making character-driven work particularly. So,
Edwin, before you go on to show the work by other artists, could you say a little bit about Edge of Frame and your
yes. So I think like even up till when I made that film through the RCA, even though I knew other animators, I was aware of other animation, I felt a bit isolated in terms of what I was doing. And then maybe 2 or 3 years ago I started to see a bit, I think maybe there started to be more stuff on the internet that was easy to see, and I just became more aware of other people making stuff that I was into and that I thought related to my stuff. So it was still a bit of a struggle in terms of thinking of it as a thing and thinking of experimental animation as a thing, because there really isn't very many things that are devoted to it. So there used to be there is an organisation called Animate Projects that I have been funded by and that I work for a bit, but and they were really the only organisation devoted to experimental animation. And they lost their Arts Council funding and became even smaller than they were, and it was tempting to think that experimental animation wasn't even really a thing, it was just some offshoot of something else. So in a rare moment of motivation and energy, I decided to start a blog and interview other animators that I kind of felt were part of what I was doing, not just animation in a broad sense, but a particular type of work. So the work that I'm going to show by other artists is work by artists who I've interviewed for this blog, and I'm hoping to kind of extend it into screen events and stuff like that. But it's not really like a calculated career type thing, it's just something that I'm kind of moved to do just because there's not much else out there. There's not really any websites devoted to that kind of work particularly, and there's not much writing about it, so I felt like it was something that needed to happen. But I'm, you know, not really a writer, so I just kind of interview them, let them write answers. But I'm going to show one more of my films first. So it's the one.
So that's the art, the work by the artist.
So this is a film from 2011, which is part of an ongoing collaboration that I'm involved in with a friend of mine who makes...
Is this the right aspect ratio?
Yes. Who makes music and writes, and yeah, you might as well just play it. I'll say something about it afterwards. So that is all pencil drawings made with a pencil and a ruler, most of it, on A4 paper, and then scanned in and then individually, very tediously coloured on Photoshop, so just filling in the gaps basically. When I initially started it, I didn't have any idea that it would look like that, and I didn't really know how it was going to look, but once I tried it looking like that, I just really liked, in a very perverse way, the fact that it didn't really look like drawn animation, and that it was kind of like much cleaner, and the colours were very artificial, but it still had the wobbliness. I wouldn't have made it that way any other way. And so I kind of made it up as I was going along with the music and the speech recordings from my friend, and we didn't really talk about it much, and we didn't really want to know what we were doing, but it just kind of organically developed. And yeah, I just liked the way it looked, I think. It was going to look a bit dirtier, I think, and then I just liked the kind of pristineness because it kind of just, I don't know, I think I like things that surprise me, and I suppose after making stuff that was a bit more like monochrome pencil stuff, I just enjoyed it looking a bit more artificial and hovering in between being pencil drawn and computer in a way, or sort of that hard edge colour type thing. But it was just an instinctual thing, really. Yeah, I feel like when I talk about a lot of my work, I'm just kind of talking about it for the sake of it. There's not much to say about it, really, and I like to answer questions, but I haven't got that much to...
I think you're being very modest, as I noticed at the Hackney Attic.
Well, it's because I think intentionally I'm not really thinking about it consciously, and it's not like there's no thought. It's just a different kind of thought, and it's about thinking through doing it. Like the sort of thing that you would make through just making something without thinking about it is more interesting and surprising, and it's got things in it that make me more interested than something that I would calculatedly make. The stuff that I've planned, I've made live action films with scripts, I've tried to make things on purpose that are really boring, so I'm more interested in the stuff that I make without really knowing what I'm doing, without really thinking about it. So therefore afterwards, I can have some thoughts about it, but I always feel like it's a bit weird saying something about it because I didn't really... It's hard to articulate. Yeah, it's totally about process, and I think that's what I'm interested in with animation, is process-driven work and what comes out of it, and it's a particular type of process in a lot of independent and experimental animation that's very different to studio animation, mainstream animation. It's it comes from the process, and what I'm interested in through interviewing other animators is the connections that lots of people work on their own, lots of people intentionally limit the materials, or things like I've done for a long time unconsciously, make myself work with only a pencil, make myself work in a very particular way, because it allows you to think, or it allows you to get into it without making too many choices, so you just make it. So, yeah, I think process is what I'm interested in, and a kind of improvised process, or a process that's opening itself up to chance and not to do with like rational thought so much.
So it's more intuitive.
Yeah.
How far do you think ahead? So you had a sequence there which you moulded into one to the other.
Yeah.
Do you think of the next?
So a lot of the time I'm not thinking more than a drawing ahead, but then when you start something and you have an idea for a bit, then you'll have to work it out. So like at the very end when this thing turned around, I had to like properly work that out.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get too much into that, because I really don't like making animations when I know what's going to happen. Like making somebody walk from one side of the room to the other and knowing what's going to happen is almost unbearable to me.
You're against in between, basically.
So, but I do it if I'm just carried away with what I'm doing. But I will a lot of the time just change what I'm doing, because I just find it so tedious. Because I just think, why wouldn't you just film it with a person? Right? So, like, that's why I could never really do much commercially, because I really don't want to know what I'm doing. And it's hard enough to make it when you don't know what you're doing, but to make it when you do is just, I just can't. So the next film I'd like to show is Fruit. It's on other people's films by a guy called Peter Millard, who, is he here? He said he might. No. And he's also an RCA graduate. Yeah.
So what we're watching on screen, this moulding, this transforming,
Yeah.
this morphing animation,
Yeah.
is it from your subconscious?
So-
Do they mean anything to you? Do you animate and then you're like, oh shit, that's totally about my childhood?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
so that weird green and yellow
Yeah.
dog. I remember.
so it's quite different in different films, and like I definitely felt with that film that it was pretty impersonal, and I was kind of liberated because I was making it in a collaboration with somebody else's music, and I felt like what I was doing was an accompaniment to what he'd already done, even though I was allowed to edit it in my own way or whatever. So I really like it because it doesn't relate to me. But the film that I showed before it, like when I made that, I could definitely see loads of stuff about like pathetic masculinity and thwarted desire that it was just obvious, you know what I mean? So that was like all there, and I kind of knew it when I was making it, but I didn't want to think about it too much. And then like, I suppose like my earlier work is definitely more personal. I was more like trying to make something about something, but I think as I've gone on, I just find it more interesting not to, because, you know, it's just more open to something else. So I do think it's about something, but it's more about things that you can't really articulate, and I dare say it's probably about me in some way, but not even like you could say the images were symbolic of anything really.
Do you get people coming up to you and saying, oh, I saw this in it? Do people give you their interpretation?
I think the first film that I showed, like, people did that quite a bit. Like, one of my tutors at the RCA was really happy because she thought it was like aggressively feminist and anti-men. Not that feminism is anti-men, but that's, you know, she thought it was like really, like, you know, decimating male, which it kind of is in a way, but it wasn't intentional, and obviously, like, I'm a man, so it's like, she read something into it that probably wasn't exactly right, but I didn't mind, it's open to stuff like that, really. But that last film, I don't know, it's pretty abstract. I don't know what you would... I don't know.
No, I was just wondering, like, what you, maybe this is the wrong thing, but what you want your viewers to get from it. Because with experimental film, there's usually, even though there's no...
I think what I want is a sort of an intense experience that you can't really articulate in words. Like, I don't really have a particular thing in mind, and I think that's why I like that, because its tone is quite uncertain, and it's sort of, it's not dark, like a lot of my other stuff is like really dark, and like that's just boring after a while, and it's quite easy in a way as well, and so I suppose I'm after something a bit more ambiguous, and I think that the most leading stuff in it is the content of the words, which I guess I know better than a lot of people who watch it, because I've heard it a lot and some of it's quite distorted, but that does relate a lot to kind of a sense of a particular time in a particular place and a kind of like drifting sort of futility in a way, which I think is probably something that goes through all my work. But and it's sort of, I think there's some humour in it as well, I suppose. But I don't know. I suppose with that particularly, I was interested in it being abstract to the point of impenetrable. Like, and what that feeling is, because that's still a feeling. And I think it's just like you do one thing and then I just get bored of something that I've done. So I could never repeat the first film. I kind of carried on with a bit of stuff like that because we envisaged it as a much longer project, but it took a long time to do, so we decided to do it in parts. So we've got a few other bits of it as well, and you know, some of it looks a bit different, but it's all kind of at the same tone. Because I got quite into the process. Because as well with like the very clean line drawing and just colouring it in, it's like there's much more distance in the process. Like you're not getting really involved in gestural marks. It's quite a detached thing. And that's probably where my brain was at the time, I think. Okay, so are you able to just skip this back to the very beginning?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So this is a film by Peter Millard, which is one of the artists that really motivated me to start this blog, because I found his work so inspiring and in some indirect way influenced things that I've done since. And he works in a similar way. There's elements of improvisation and it's not particularly narrative, and I just feel like there's some shared things in our approach, but they're quite different films. And I just think in terms of animation, not to knock the RCA, but in terms of RCA animation particularly, it's very, very refreshing. So I don't want to speak for Peter about this film really, but there is an interview on the blog that I mentioned with him about his work, which was done while he was just finishing that, or he just finished it, I think. But he's just finishing a new film, which sounds pretty good, and yeah. Just. Okay, so the next film I'm going to show, so most of the films that I've made, well, some of them were made, the first one was made at the RCA, but most of them have been made without any funding or any hidden wits. It's kind of like what Martin was saying about Film Alloy in terms of the freedom that it gives you, but it's not really a choice, it's just out of necessity, because there's not really any options to get funding for this kind of film. But I have felt in the past chasing funding is very detrimental to your work if it becomes an imbalanced sort of situation where you're trying to gear your work to getting funding. But anyway, this was the last film that I made with any funding, which was funded by the organisation that I mentioned earlier called Animate Projects, and they gave, I think, maybe 5 artists, I think it was just over £1,000 and 5 weeks to make a film, and there was a kind of brief, and I got one of the grants, and it was very intense making it in such a short space of time. I think most of what's in it was made in the last week, and it's based on the tape recordings of a man who was called Raymond Cass, who was a hearing aid specialist in Hull. He was Philip Larkin's hearing aid specialist amongst other people's, and he was also a researcher into the paranormal, and he did these tape recordings of this thing called electronic voice phenomenon, which is making tape recordings of empty rooms, or a lot of it's of radio static, and hearing noises in it, and then a lot of them decide it's aliens or ghosts, you know. But he thought it was dead people, and I don't. But there's a CD which inspired the film, and which a lot of the soundtrack is made up of his recordings, and whatever you think they are, I just found them really, really interesting. So there's some recordings of him his commentary on his work, and there's some of his recordings, and then there's also some music by the guy who I collaborated with in my other film as well. And I made a kind of sound design quite spontaneously, and then made the film to fit it. And it's, you know, I think you could make a really interesting documentary about him, but I'm not really that person to do it, so it's a bit more of an abstract kind of approach.
How did you come by the material, the audio material?
How did I come by it? I think I just heard it on the internet or something. I think I just stumbled across it, and then it kind of coincided with this brief that kind of related to that sort of thing. And I just sort of pitched this kind of, or made a proposal based on this kind of idea. I mean, I've made a lot of proposals and never got any funding from anyone, so it was quite amazing to get some. But I have found working without funding, even though there's a lot of flaws to it, is kind of preferable in a way, not having to tell anyone what you're going to do, especially when you don't know what you're going to do. And it's kind of made it. Anyway.
Okay, Mike, thanks.
We have the one called Crux Film, which is also the same ratio. So the next film is by two people who are now husband and wife. I think they were together when they made this, and they're both filmmakers in their own right. The guy's called Alexander Stewart, and the woman's called Lily Carey. And so she's quite a successful cartoonist. She does graphic novels and comics, and she's also a book illustrator. And she has lots of illustrations in like the New Yorker. They live in Chicago. He is like more of an experimental filmmaker, but also makes a lot of experimental animations, and he teaches animation. And they run a festival in Chicago called iWorks, which was also one of the inspirations for me to start the blog, because it's specifically devoted to experimental animation. And they show a lot of stuff that I kind of feel in tune with. And I've had my work shown there a few times. And they've been very encouraging for me and my work and the blog, and they're really interested in animation as an art form, and the kind of fairly unknown history of experimental animation, particularly in the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of films, one of which I'm going to show you in a bit, by people who worked in a lot of different areas, on like TV and also in the art world, but their work's quite hard to see basically, and they've shown quite a lot of that sort of stuff at their festival, which is every year. And they curate the festival. It's not like you don't submit to it, they just pick what they like and show it. And I think that shows in the festival. It's kind of like got a good focus, and I feel like a lot of animation festivals are just not very inspiring really. And I think it's not that I've been to it, but looking at the programme, it's quite one of the more exciting ones. So, and that's not the show my book, but this is the film that they made together, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, we'll have a 10-minute break then, ladies and gentlemen. Can I have a big round of applause for Edwin? Just to remind you where we got up to, you had just shown that last one.
Yeah, I've got a plan now.
Excellent.
I want to show two of mine on the 4x3, if you need to change that. And then after that, I'm just going to show some other people's, which will be on the other one.
Okay.
So you only have to change it once.
Okay.
Sorry to be so awkward.
No, it's...
I don't know why I've resolutely stuck to making films 4x3, but I do have. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm sure there is a very good reason.
There was.
Do you want to explain it?
I could explain it actually. I think that I was often think about my films as not being like films and more being like drawings that kind of move, and I think that the widescreen is very like a cinematic thing, and a square or a 4x3 is less cinematic and more maybe, I don't know, there's just something about it that makes it less
it's
like
a sketchbook.
Yeah, like I'm not very good at, and nor do I particularly want to replicate real space and have real people and emulate live action with my animation. I don't know which comes first, me not being very good at it or me not wanting to do it, but a lot of my work is very, very flat and very not hiding the fact that it's a drawing, and that's kind of, I'm quite interested in making a thing about. So I think making it widescreen it's like this is a film, and it's kind of a vague thing in my head, but it was a thing. So the first one I want to show, I think it just says mysteries on it. It might be the top on the right-hand pile.
Yeah.
So when I said that I haven't done any commercial work, this is kind of as near as I've got. And this is one of two films that I made for an American publishing company. They publish short stories on the internet. They're called Electric Literature. And they've published short stories by some really interesting writers. And they have since then, so they started off having like a kind of online anthology thing. And then they started this other thing called recommended reading. And what they did, they seem to have stopped doing it now, but what they did for a long time was commission animators, some really interesting animators, to make very short films based on one sentence from one of the short stories, called single sentence animations. And basically they just give you the sentence and you can do what you like. So in that it's commercial work, it's promoting something, but they give you absolute creative freedom and want you to go as far away from or as near to the story or the sentence as you like. So I made two. This is the second one that I made. The story was by an American author called Ben Marcus, and the story was called Watching Mysteries with My Mother, which is what the film, I guess, has ended up being called. So there's text throughout it. As part of the film is the sentence that I was given, and then the film is just kind of a response to the sentence.
Can I just ask before we start, how did you find out about them, or how did they find out about
well,
you? How did the commission take place?
I saw quite a few of their animation. So the animators that they picked were some of the animators that I really like. Martha Colburn's like an American college animator. Alice Cohen, who's also does similar stuff. Some people that I didn't know, but I really liked loads of these animations. So I think I just had a sort of thing where I just emailed them one day and said that I was really interested in them and I'd like to do it. And then I didn't hear anything from for ages from them. And then they got back to me and they'd forgotten that I'd emailed them and thought that they'd thought of me, and I didn't correct them. So they asked me to do one, thinking that they'd seen my work, but actually I'd like badgered them and they'd forgotten about it. So it was quite good, really. And then they asked me to do another one after that.
Okay, well that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, can you... Right. In a way, I found the text completely irrelevant.
Well, I mean, for me it was kind of just a trigger, really, and you know, I kind of I like having something to kind of hook something around, but it is almost irrelevant what it is.
Yeah.
In a way. The music was by the same guy who did the music on quite a few of my other films as well.
Can I just interject something else as
yes.
well? Just early on in my rather ramshackle introduction, I was saying about your use of pencil on paper for abstract elements, because all the work you've shown is the tidied up version. I found
the next one isn't though.
Okay, good. Because there was a piece I found on your Vimeo channel, which is a preparatory sketch animation for one of I think the second film you showed, and I think that's right.
Yes,
before
yes,
you
it
did
is,
the
yes.
Photoshop stage.
Without the colours, yes.
Without the colours,
yes.
And I was really blown away by that. The kind of feeling of sort of surprise that you see this kind of slightly mottled paper, which is so familiar from a still drawing, and the whole thing creating this new three-dimensional space in mind. So I just find that, you know, really shocking.
I think what I was kind of thinking about with the brightly coloured stuff is how there's this kind of correlation between hand-drawn animation and authenticity and honesty, and when it's kind of smudgy and it's got this kind of like hand-drawn quality, that I think I just noticed a lot of adverts and things that were like really exploiting that to kind of like say we are this or we are that, and I just thought it's just as much of a thing, it's just as much contrived as anything else, really.
I wasn't saying one was better.
No, no.
I was saying it was really interesting to see as well.
But I think that I just like, when I make stuff like that, I just sort of feel like, how interesting is it? Is it a cliche in its own right? I like to do something else with it maybe, and that's just why I ended up getting it to be more cleaned up. But I like, you know, could have done it. I don't know. I think I did monochrome stuff, then I wanted to do colour stuff, then I went back to monochrome stuff. Probably just boredom more than anything. The next one's black and white anyway. Is the one on the top of that? Yes. Yes. So this film is silent, and it was made. It's the most recent film that I made. It's not really like any of my other films. at all. In the way that I made it was there was like a call out for work to be submitted to an exhibition, and the theme was landscape and dislocation, and I just had this idea at the same time, and I thought I would just use it as an excuse to make a film. That I had this book, found this book about landscape that was published by the Architectural Press in the 60s, and it was quite a dated, strange book about a part of Oxfordshire that was going to rack and ruin with new building, and it was like a survey of the area. But when I opened it, the pictures really appealed to me. They were like black and white photos of fields and just strange little places that kind of reminded me of where I grew up, even though it was a long way away and in a different time. And the turn of phrase in the writing was very eccentric and odd. So I just had this idea to kind of only use things from the book, but to redraw them. So the images and the text are just redrawn from the book, but taken out of context. And then the kind of black pattern that's over the top of them is based on the book cover. And I just planned it out quite like I kind of thought I'll do it to this formula and just see what happens. I kind of tried a little bit of it and liked what I saw and just made it. There wasn't really any real conscious thought behind it, but it wasn't improvised. It was made to a formula, which is kind of quite different to the other stuff that I've done.
Okay.
And it was kind of made for thinking about as an installation or in a gallery rather than as a film sort of thing. Which is one of the reasons it's not got any sound.
All right, Richard?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
How did you get the titles like that to sort of wobble?
It's just like a cycle of a few drawings, sort of repeating. So each drawing is slightly different.
No, I was thinking of the actual letters.
Yeah, they're drawn.
They're drawn. Oh,
so
right.
like enlarge the type from the book. And
right,
traced it.
okay.
Were you tracing over the photos as well?
Yeah.
Sad
to say.
When you say you're spontaneous, like you don't really know what you're doing, that seemed quite planned.
Yeah.
At what point do you
So it was
differentiate between the...
planned without really knowing why I was planning it. Like I wanted to see, I tried it, like maybe one of the shots or whatever, and I just wanted to see what the cumulative effect would be like. And I suppose that a lot of phrases stuck out for me in the book, and I wondered if it would, what would happen. I just wanted to make something new from the book that would be different and see what that would be. So it was planned, but to sort of to find something out rather than to make a particular thing. I mean, I had lots of thoughts about the book, and I ended up reading the book while I was making it, and I had thoughts about the images and stuff like that, but I don't know if they're that connected to the film or not really.
So was it a case of doing one image, one word, one sentence, and then thinking, what should I do next, or was it... So you
Chose the images and chose the sentences and tried to bring them together, sort of thing. And I did more and got rid of some.
How many boiling pot frames do you use?
On that?
Yeah, about 5? Does the text use about 5?
3 maybe?
3, okay, yeah, let's try and work it out.
Did it get into the exhibition?
Yeah, it wasn't a very big exhibition.
Was it big?
Didn't go.
Oh no!
It was in the middle of Norfolk. It was very difficult to get to. No, I made it for that, but I didn't, you know, it was just a thing to have as the thing. And I've had it in other things, and, you know, it was a thing to spark a film, really. I was going to go, but I think it's probably often better not to go to these things. They're better in your head.
Where did you get the image of the looked like 1970s Bryant housing estates?
So they're all from this particular book, and you know, some of them really are familiar to me from places where I grew up. But they're
That's
just
what I was going to ask
the whole point of the book is about this particular area being like the way that it was developed and the way that buildings were being made it look like everywhere else in the country. So it's about this homogenisation of the landscape, which is why it looks like where I grew up in the 80s, even though this is the 60s in Oxfordshire. So I think that was kind of interesting because it was part of the point of the book, and it's why it seemed weird to me. Particularly those flats are around the corner from where I grew up, but they're not. They're in the 60s Oxford, so yeah. It's kind of like a lot of England, really.
It goes really well with the text.
Why has it got the horror movie slash...
So the cover design of the book has that kind of design over a photograph on it, which was kind of the starting point. But I just wanted to have this kind of... That was really where the experiment came. I wanted to try it and see what it looked like. I was really interested in like hand-painted films, like Stan Brakhage and stuff like that, and I wanted to kind of approach something like that with drawn animation. So that's not painted on film, it's all ink poured or blown on paper. But just that kind of visual sensation in the foreground while you're looking at something in the background. It was like an optical experiment, I suppose, in a way. And it was kind of had a horrible feeling, or like a claustrophobic feeling that was quite intense to me, which I hadn't anticipated, which was what kind of kept me doing it and made me interested in it.
Have you done other experiments recently of actually obliterating the image? Because I know one of your very early films, you obliterated it with Tipex.
Yeah, all the films I made at university on my degree were collage animations with Tipex and kind of destroying stuff with Tipex and stuff like that. At the moment, I'm kind of doing more stuff, a bit like the colourful drawing stuff, but I think yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know what I'm doing next, really. I'm sort of got this ongoing collaboration with my friend. It's like a series of lots of smaller films. But then I think I'll always want to do something else, so like things like that now and again as well. But I really, really like films that are like direct animation, like drawing on film or painting on film or decaying film or painting, you know. So there's a woman called Jennifer Reeves in America who does it, and Stan Brakhage obviously, and I really, really like that, but I don't really want to do it, but I like to try and do it in a different way that will look different. Do you know what I mean? Like, I like to kind of think about things that aren't what I'm doing and let that feed into what I'm doing.
Did you overlay the ink afterwards, or did you put the ink on each drawn frame?
No, they're separate. They're separate
that's what I thought.
images, After Effects. Yeah. You're revealing all my
terrible
cheats.
I'm trying to deconstruct the process.
It would have been much, much more impressive to myself if I'd spoiled every drawing and drawn 100 of them, but I wouldn't have finished it by the time I was 70, so you've got to have a balance, I suppose. But if you can't tell, that's, that's great.
So, Edwin,
yes.
For the rest of the screening, do you want to show more of your own work or more?
No, I've got a few more films of other people's that I'd like to show, but whatever the time limit is or whatever people
there
want
isn't
to
really a
do.
time limit.
Okay,
It's just
so yeah.
What you're happy to do. And what
2 or 3 other films by other artists. Good.
I don't want to go on especially late. But
What time is it?
It's 9:30, but I think we're having a great time.
How long? How long have I got
tell you that. I mean, I can't be.
Well, let's take it film by film.
Yeah, exactly. So what have we got next?
Okay, so there's one called Yield.
Have I got to?
Yeah, I think the rest are all 16 by 9.
Right, well, do you want to say?
Yes.
Okay. So you've got to go back. Go back. Go back. No. Just go back to menu. Right, picture mode. Now put plus. Hit plus now. Yeah, plus. And then plus on screen adjustment. Yeah, and then you go along. So whatever it is for plus, I think. Plus. Yeah. And then go up. And hit plus. Hit menu and then menu again. You see? So if anyone thinks I don't know what I'm doing, Right.
So the next film is called Yield, and it's by an American guy called Caleb Woods, who is the person that I interviewed on this blog that I mentioned most recently, and he's also going to start writing and doing interviews with the animators himself, and he went to Rhode Island School of Design, and he's had films in loads of festivals, and he's quite young, and he does lots of different types of films. He does quite a lot of drawn animation, but this one isn't. Maybe follows on from some of the effect of the last film in a way. So it, yeah, I'll let it speak for itself.
Okay, thanks.
He's very prolific, but I really like the way he works, his process. He does use a lot of improvisation, and obviously with that, and there's another one that's all images of bird shit, called bird shit, but it's kind of using these chance finding things, but then he kind of animates it by the use of the editing, makes things kind of move.
Is he working digitally now? Because there's a little pop at the end that made it look like a 16mm film. That was all digital photographs, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was digital photos. I think he made it have a bit of a filmy vibe. Yeah. So Al Jarnow is an American animator who made a lot of Access TV and Sesame Street particularly, a lot of the animations in Sesame Street in the 70s and 80s, and he made his own personal work as well, and hopefully he's going to be answering some of my questions for the blog. I think a lot of my stuff was kind of influenced by him without really knowing it, because I think I saw a lot of it when I was a kid. I think that's the case for quite a few animators. I know Alexander Stewart and Lily Carey, who made the Crooks film in the first half, really into his stuff, and he's sort of been rediscovered. They made this DVD of his film. They didn't. Somebody did. There's a DVD of his films and a documentary on it about him. It's really interesting. And he's part of like a kind of community of animator artists in New York in the 70s and 80s who, as I was mentioned earlier, their work's quite hard to find because most of it's, you know, on film, and a lot of them don't want to put it on the internet, although they've gone on to other careers. But some really interesting animators. The famous ones, I guess, would be like Susan Pitt and Sally Cruikshank and people like that. But there's lots of people who made films then who went on to do other stuff, and some of it's really, really great. And a lot of it has this kind of graphic sensibility. This one in particular, I think, it didn't influence my kind of sharp-edged, colourful stuff, but I saw it around the same time and definitely kind of responded to it. So I think this was on Sesame Street, but I think it stands as a film in its own right. Some of his more personal films that weren't for TV are maybe more in tune in terms of what I was saying about process, elements of improvisation, things like that. That's like a kind of commission for TV, but I think in terms of the look of it and the style of it, it's definitely challenged with some of yeah.
Must have been a lot of planning that went into that one
Yeah.
in particular. With your own work, I just wanted to ask about, it seems like sometimes, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but the animation is a product of the process of animation that you love a lot.
Yeah.
And the process itself is sort of an artistic expression for you, almost a performance, in the sense that you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's really cool for me because it's taken that aspect of the process as an artistic endeavor and kind of exploded it. And I just wondered if you'd ever thought about kind of performance art or scaling up your animation, putting it in real space, or putting it in big spaces, small spaces. Have you done anything like that?
Well, I think I've always thought of it a bit in those terms, in the way that my first animation was like basically trying to document the process of making a collage. I've been doing lots of collage work, and as it built up in layers, I was just kind of frustrated that you would just see the last version and that it wasn't maybe as interesting as the other one. So I started trying to document it as it built up, but then I started immediately trying to do things for the camera. But I'd intentionally had my hand in it in bits, and it was about documenting the creative process in a way, which I think a lot of my work has kind of carried that on in some way. And maybe like interviewing other animators is a similar thing. Like, I'm interested in the creative process, I'm interested in what happens, not trying to explain it, but I'm just interested in knowing about it and seeing it. And in terms of like screening my work in different situations, I'm really open to that, but I'm definitely not open to me being part of it in any way, apart from maybe seeing my hand, because I just like want that separation, and I like it to be an experience, and I really, you know, it's really important for me to have the human present behind the work and to feel that, but that's the challenge of the work. If I was there, it would be like a shortcut in a way. I sort of want it to come through the work in some way, in a weird way, so you're kind of aware of something about me that I don't know about, not my character or my personality, but something, you know, else. But I'm definitely not ever going to appear in any films. I'm not really, performance art is not something I'm interested in doing myself at all. But I think that drawing and animation is very performative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Have we got time for one more?
Yeah,
all right. So the last film.
It'd be nice to finish on a film of yours as well.
All right.
Can you change the tape, please?
Stop there. Okay.
So one more by another artist, and
yes.
then we finish with one of yours.
Yes. So we'll show Velocity, which is by Carolina, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce the surname correctly, Glisiek. Anybody knows her. She is an RCA graduate, and this film won the Jerwood Drawing Prize and has been screened a lot. And I think that it was one of the... I saw it when I was doing these kind of brightly coloured hard edge things, and then I think it was one of the things that made me want to get back into sort of more monochrome pencil type stuff, like the one I showed a few films ago, because I just really like what she does with a very simple line drawing effect. And some of you may even have seen this film before, but I think it's really nice. It's maybe more, you know, it's got a voiceover, it's maybe a bit more narrative than some of the other films, but I think her approach to animation, from talking to her about her process, is very improvised, very lo-fi. She allows things to just happen, she doesn't use very high-tech methods at all, and I think it's something really comes to from that approach to process.
Okay. Tom, do you want to go, or shall I? And that last one, in tone is rather different to the other films that you've selected by other artists.
Yeah, it's much more personal.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's, you know, she wrote it, but she got it to be narrated by somebody else, and by a man, I think she's Polish, he's an English man. And I was really interested in her decision to do that. I don't know, I personally would really like to at least for her to be reading it. I don't know, there's something jarring, I think it's intentional, there's something jarring about it.
I think it's to make it more remote.
Yeah, but I think it's really great. I mean, it's moving and more personal in a way that the other ones are, but I think that it's all about drawing as well, I think, and memory and drawing, and the link between her memory and images, and so there's a link between the form and the process and the content. I think it's really good, really clever.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
So the next one is a film that I made for a thing called 1 Minute by Kerry Baldry, which you know you were in as well.
Yeah.
So it's 1 minute long, and so she curates programs of 1 minute films. This film was a direct continuation from the film that I showed earlier with the very brightly coloured abstract shapes, and I made it in exactly the same way, except I decided rather than colouring it in Photoshop, I'd colour it in coloured pencil and see how much difference it made, and then it kind of turned into a different feeling, and the sound that I was using kind of went with it. It's more distorted and more fuzzy, so it's kind of part of this ongoing collaboration, but kind of different.
We say an ongoing collaboration with...
So his name's Will, and he's like a musician, and he's recorded as Supreme Vagabond Craftsman. He's made various records, but for the last quite a few years he's just been making kind of synthesizer music, which he hasn't really released, but I've got a lot of it in my films because he just sends it to me. But he also writes, some of it you would call poetry, some of it is just kind of prose, I guess. and so I'm kind of lucky to kind of be able to exploit that and use his material for my films, which he's not particularly precious about and seems to quite like. He is interested in a lot of the same things as me: books, films, music, things like that, and also has a similar approach to not wanting to know what he's doing and not wanting it to be sort of planned out. So we both enjoy the aspect of the collaboration, which is the surprise, so putting things together that maybe wouldn't necessarily instinctively go together, but then they kind of end up working. It's like an unspoken thing that it's hard to explain, but I think we share a lot of interests, references and things like that. We don't really talk about much what we're actually doing.
Okay, so this is the final.
This is
the final film by Ed.
He'll get over it.
Ed will be on hand to answer questions afterwards. So the last Ed film this evening, we might then have a short segment at the end which will show two other films by Rob and by Kate.
Well, thank you. I don't know what to say. Absolutely fascinating talk and a selection of your work, which have a really undefinable quality to them. I do hope that off the back of your Edge of Frame blog that you'll actually start curating programmes of these other artists' work.
It's in the works.
It is. Okay, so you'll come back sometime and tell us about it.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, come big round of applause for everyone. Does anyone have any questions? Any remaining questions, actually, I should say, because everyone's been asking questions throughout the evening, which is a sign of a very engaging talk.
Yeah, I've got one. I mean, what's the film that was made by two people who are now married?
Yes.
Yeah, what's the film called?
Their film's called Crux Film, C-R-U-X Film.
Oh, Crux Film.
They both make films in their own right as well, which are worth checking out.
Anyone else? I suppose we're kind of exhausted. Question mark on that.
It's a quick one. So how many films do you make like a year? Because obviously if you're only doing it in between.
Yeah, it's very changeable. I mean, there was a period of time when I didn't have as much else to do, like work-wise, so I made a lot more work. So maybe about 2010 to 2012, I made quite a few of those films, maybe like 5 or something. And I've made hardly, maybe like 1.5 in the last 2 years, because I've been working a lot more, I've done other things. Also, like, when I was single, I made a lot more work. Like, when you've not got much to do, you can make more work. So it's very much tied into my life, which I don't really care. It's not like, there's no big reason to make loads of films, and it's just whatever comes out. And also, sometimes what you make is just rubbish, and sometimes it just comes out. And also, there's not that much correlation between what you see and how long it takes, as I guess anyone who makes animation knows. So, the film about Raymond Cass took 5 weeks. Maybe what was on screen was like 1.5 weeks worth of work, whereas the colourful one, because I was colouring every drawing in on Photoshop, it took like 4 months, and it's a shorter film. So, I'm driven to work in whatever area of work, and that fits into how I'm living at that time, and what comes out is what comes out. Yeah.
So was the Photoshop one slower then?
Well, it's just, it's no slower to draw it, but it's so slow to meticulously colour in every bit of the drawing on Photoshop.
Was it? I didn't see it because I was obviously there. Was it flat? Or
Yeah,
was it
flat
just
colour,
flat colour?
yeah. I mean, there probably would be easier ways to do
Well,
it.
there are all well, there used to be. I don't know if they exist anymore, but we used to have a program called. It's the forerunner of 2Boo, but it's called US Animation, where you basically just squirt the colour in. So if you have an area and it's not moving much, you could squirt it through the whole scene.
But on a flat drawing that you've scanned in, and the bits of the drawing and moving around, it's just a pencil drawing on paper.
Yeah, you had to vectorise the drawing.
Exactly, which would totally change the film.
Yeah, then it changes the
Yeah.
quality of the
So, you know.
But there were ways of doing
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
where you map it. So you cover the mapped area, then you put the pencil line back
Yeah.
on top. But I don't know,
I
since
mean,
they've gone out of fashion that bit.
I'm definitely someone for like the masochistic side of an animator. Like, I can really get into laborious labour that nobody ever notices. So.
Anyone else?
Yeah, one more question. I mean, do any particular artists inspire you or for your work? Like any abstract artists?
Yeah, I mean, I really like a lot of painting. I think I would probably I like to be a painter, but I'm not a painter, but a lot of abstract painting, a lot of painting is kind of inspirational, but I think I'm generally like inspired by things that aren't what I'm doing, so like non-animation, like painting or other types of film, or other things that aren't exactly what I'm doing, is more inspiring to me.
Would you say like maybe music influences?
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess like with the kind of non-linear types of films that they are, and the kind of structure or non-structure that they are, I kind of think of them in a bit of I mean, that's the kind of thing with abstract animation generally, the whole history of like visual music, which isn't really something I'm trying to do, but you know, it's music is very much part of it, really.
I do find it really interesting how you're taking the ideas which exist in other forms of animation in cinema and then translating them or transposing them to pencil on paper, which is something that for all of us is very, very familiar. It's kind of what you start as a child, you're given a pencil and paper. So to take all this other stuff and actually translate it to something that's so immediate, is, you know, I find fascinating, a real achievement. So
yeah, I mean, it's just like a thing that I'm interested in, like making things flat, like making everything flat, or making everything primary colours, or it's just something that you feel like you want to see what it looks like. Really.
And very quickly, just to finish up, what's next? What are you working on at the moment?
So I started like a continuation of that collaboration before the silent film that I showed, and I'm kind of continuing to work on that. I'm involved with something that is a bit more, it's not a commercial thing, but it's more of a commission thing, but it might not happen, and I'm not really supposed to talk about it, but it would be quite exciting if it did happen.
Well, fingers crossed on this unknown, unquantifiable project that may or may not happen. Okay, well, a good point to finish this part of the evening on. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause.